Няма пряк път към здравето. Няма и пряк път към победата. Има дисциплина и категорични избори. Здравето започва от това, какво ядем и пием.
Павел Щелин е руски политически теолог и православен християнски мислител, който свързва западните и източните традиции на политическата теология. Щелин е учил в Централно-европейския университет в Будапеща, където е специализирал в политически науки, медийни изследвания и руска външна политика. Академичната му работа включва рецензирани изследвания върху информационната война, дигиталните медии и символичните измерения на съвременната геополитика. Мисълта на Павел Щелин и неговите трудове са дълбоко повлияни от руските религиозни философи Бердяев, Илин, Карсавин и западни политически теолози Фьогелин, Шмидт, Агамбен, като същевременно се основава особено на светоотеческата традиция на свети Максим Изповедник. Основните философски позиции на Павел Щелин са, че политиката винаги има религиозна основа. Това вероятно е най-характерната му теза. Според Щелин няма неутрална политика. Дори либерализмът според него функционира като своеобразна светска религия. Щелин твърди, че кризата на Запада е духовна, а не икономическа. Щелин многократно казва, че цивилизациите загиват не от бедност, а от загуба на смисъл. Според Щелин, индивидуализмът, консуматорството, разрушаването на традицията, ослабването на семействата, загубата на религиозна перспектива водят до цивилизационна криза. За Щелин историята е преди всичко духовен процес. Тук той е силно повлиян от руската религиозна философия. Една от любимите му теми, според него хората не живеят според статистики или икономически показатели. Те живеят според митове, символи, исторически разкази, свещени образи, национални митологии. Затова, според него, днешната информационна война е всъщност борба на символите. Щелин категорично критикува постмодернизма, радикалния индивидуализъм, технокрацията, идеята, че технологиите могат да заменят морала и критикува най-вече политиката без религиозна и етична основа, геополитиката като бизнес и война. What is, let's say, Ukraine? What is Ukraine?
Like it's the sect which is responsible for the genocide, for the Volhynian massacre, and basically it's you can consider them like if you give them the most charitable readings, they kind of emerge within the general process of Eastern European nationalism. They believe in a holy Ukraine, also in a holy Ukraine, a sacred Ukraine, and they are ready to sacrifice anything and everything for it. This group, like it basically shares, I would say, the ideology of one of its founders, Roman Shukhevich. And to understand Shukhevich, you need to be like very clear. Basically, it says, so if out of 20,000 Ukrainian population of Ukrainian territory, only 10 remain, it's fine.
How do you understand Russia as a civilization, culture project, political project, or the last empire, or the empire of the like Jedis? I don't know how to...
Well, I would not call it Jedis. Okay. I will also give you different ways of understanding Russia, and your audience can choose which one like they would find the most appropriate in the current moment. So one line of argument is Russia as a historical entity, and this historical entity has a continuity at least from the Saint Vladimir's baptismal of Russian people. And for example, during the service to the Russian saints, which happens in June, there is this famous line, "Holy Russia, keep your Orthodox faith, for this is your standing stone, founding stone, for this is something which holds you together." Really hard to translate the word утверждение in English, but basically something like this.
Yeah.
And this is a subject which is its purpose, which is its fate, which is what it should be. However, at the same time, the story of Russia is parallel, you can want to the story of Israel from the Old Testament, because you can say if you read the story, it's like Israel is constantly rebelling against its calling. And the story of Russia is this constant process of like rebellion, you can put it this way. So we don't want to do this. We want to be like the part of West, or sometimes we want to be part of the East, or sometimes we just don't want to do anything. We want to run away into our forest and don't deal with the global history, all and all and all. When, let's say, there is a critical mass of this desire, then some time of trouble comes. Either Mongol comes, or Hitler comes, or Napoleon comes, or Poles come, etc., etc., etc.
Lech Walesa in our studio say that Russian is imperia.
Russia is not an empire, because empire is illegal in part of status. But if you substantially, of course Russia is an empire. And it's a good thing, because what does empire mean? Like, just to be clarified, to me to say that a certain people is building an empire is a compliment.
But what happens, why has Russia become so heavily demonized in the West?
Sorry, Poles, Bulgarians, Serbians, you will never be part of the West. You will never be part of, you were not part of this empire. Like, this is ultimately important. And that's why, you see, in the West, you simply don't have this name for partnership, what Russians mean by partnership. This idea of we are super different, but we are equal. And this comes to the whole philosophy of Herrschaft, as I would say in German. Like, in Western, the philosophy of domination is very Hobbesian or Nietzschean or etc. It means that if I'm above, you are low. Master and slave.
Yeah.
Master and slave dialectic, if you want to put it this way. Russia doesn't have it. Russia has different understanding. It has this dream of equal partnership. So it's either will end with, as they call it, decolonization of Russia. If Russia loses the conflict, it will end basically with Russia turning into Yugoslavia. And if Russia wins, it will end with effectively dissolution or disappearance of the Ukrainian state. The sole purpose of Ukrainian state, like, because it's founded on this like very narrow like understanding of this Ukrainian nationalist sect, is to be anti-Russian. So Christians are persecuted in Ukraine, Orthodox people are persecuted in Ukraine, and exactly this horrible, hard, tragic time, which later we remember as times of saints.
Hello, Pavel, Mr. Szczelin. How are you? Where are you? If it's not a secret.
Thank you very much. I'm fine. I currently reside in States, basically, in the United States.
Yeah. First, from our question is, what is, let's say, Ukraine? What is Ukraine? Ukraine. What is Ukraine for you? For the history, maybe.
I think it will be helpful to answer your question from four different angles. So the first angle is, you can say, geopolitical. Ukraine is a geo-drone, you know, like drones which are flying and like means of weapons. And historically this territory and been used by many different agents, let's say the highest bidder, to cause pain and trouble for its opponents and its enemies. If you look in the 17th century, if you look in the 16th century, you would see how, let's say, Turkey used Ukraine to cause pain to Poland, Poland used Ukraine to cause pain to Russia, and Russia, when possible, also used this territory to strengthen its interests. If you're looking into modern times, it's from this perspective, it's a geo-drone, which is used by European Union and NATO countries to deal maximum amount of damage to Russia. And obviously, from this perspective, the fate of this entity is simply irrelevant. It's an irrelevant question. You don't care, about the fate of the drone. Even if the drone is destroyed, but it hits the target, it fulfilled its purpose. That's one line of argument. Second line of argument, I would say, is more historiosophy. So it's a combination of history and philosophy. And you can say it's what makes this story tragic for Russians, and this story is relevant only for Russians, that as this geo-drone is used a part of Russian people. So from this perspective, Ukraine, it's a part of Russian people who, due to different historical processes, followed not always the same path as main Russian land. And this part, however, is often been more willing than the others to basically sell its soul for the Western dreams. For your audience, I would highly recommend reading a short novel of one of the greatest Russian writers of the 19th century, Nikolai Gogol, who himself was originally from Malorussia, so ethnically we would call him now Ukrainian, though he himself never called himself Ukrainian. And the novel is called Taras Bulba. And in Taras Bulba, there is a story of Taras, like the Zaporozhian Cossack, and his two sons, Andriy and Ostap. And Andriy basically follows this path, he falls in love with the Polish girl, noble girl, and he sells his comradeship, he sells his faith, he sells his all his loyalties for the sake of being accepted as a noble Shlechtich, and basically later Taras had to kill them. It's a very tragic story, but it's a short story.
It's a very interesting story for our public. Taras said to his son, I warn you, I will kill you. This is typical in this moment, Okay.
Yeah, it's a very moment. And another famous quote is from this story is so, ну что, сынку, помогли тебе твои ляхи. So basically, son, have your Poles helped you, before he has to execute basically his son. So it's a very tragic story, but it's very relevant. So that's the second line of argument. So basically, it's a tragedy within one people. However, there are also two other lines of argument. The third line of argument, you can consider Ukraine as an identity, as a certain type of religious identity within Russia, all Russia. And the part of this identity, you can say effectively, if you know your Bible, remember this famous story between Jacob and Isaac, when the right for the birthright is being sold for bean soup, bean stew. And basically in Russian history, there is always this part of the elite and often part of the people often wants to be just the part of the West. And if you need to sell your identity, at least part of it, maybe not all of it, but part of it, for this dream of cooperation, for this dream of being accepted as equals, for this dream of being the same as you, French, Germans, Brits, Danes, you can consider this basically general process also as a certain type of Ukrainian identity, because in the history of Russia there have been many edges, you say, many Ukrainas, and in Ukraine you often have this particularly temptation, if you want to put it this way. So you can consider it's a certain kind of temptation that big Russian cultural space has been fighting within itself, honestly, since 1,000 years ago. If you read the story of princes fighting with each other before Mongols, you can already see this pattern. And final is the narrowest, but maybe nowadays the most visible story is this literal religious sect of Ukrainian nationalists, which originated only in the late part of the 19th century. It's the sect which is responsible for the genocide, for the Volhynian massacre, and basically it's you can consider them, if you give them the most charitable readings, they emerge within the general process of Eastern European nationalism. However, it took the most, because there were proto-fascist regimes in many Eastern European countries in mid-war period. However, in Ukraine, this group took a particular religious connotation. They believe in a holy Ukraine, also in a holy Ukraine, a sacred Ukraine, and they are ready to sacrifice anything and everything for it. And the fact that it is religious, you can see that recently, yesterday, Ukrainian Rada has passed this law about the creation of pantheon of Ukrainian heroes, and literally every single war criminal of the World War II is now being glorified and being treated as sacred. And this group, like, it basically shares, I would say, the ideology of one of its founders, Roman Shukhevich. And to understand Shukhevich, you need to be, like, very clear. Basically, it says, he said, like, if out of, I might do the quote not exactly correctly, but the spirit is right. So if out of 20,000 Ukrainian population of Ukrainian territory, only 10 remain, it's fine. It's good enough price for us for the creation of pure Ukrainian state. Basically, this group is ready to kill everyone. By ready to kill, I mean, like, not they're like prepared. I think that's the best word. So they are prepared, like, let's say, if in the process of this war, like, Ukrainian population will drop to 5 million, but they will all be of this religious identity, they will be okay with it. So that's how I would answer your question from different angles.
Around this explanation, in this moment, what is Russia? How do you understand Russia as a civilization, culture project, political project, or the last empire, or the empire of the, like, Jedis? I don't know how to...
Well, I would not call it Jedis. Okay. I will also give you different ways of understanding Russia, and your audience can choose which one, like, they would find the most appropriate in the current moment. So one line of argument is Russia as a historical entity, and this historical entity has a continuity, at least from the Saint Vladimir's baptismal of Russian people. And for example, during the service to the Russian saints, which happens in June, there is this famous line, "Holy Russia, keep your Orthodox faith, for this is your standing stone, founding stone, for this is something which holds you together." Really hard to translate the word утверждение in English, but basically something like this.
Yeah.
And this is a subject which is its purpose, which is its fate, which is what it should be. However, at the same time, the story of Russia is parallel, you can want to the story of Israel from the Old Testament, because you can say, if you read the story, it's like Israel is constantly rebelling against its calling. And the story of Russia is this constant process of, like, rebellion, you can put it this way. So we don't want to do this, we want to be like the part of West, or sometimes we want to be part of the East, or sometimes we just don't want to do anything, we want to run away into our forest and don't deal with the global history, all in all in all. When, let's say, there is a critical mass of this desire, then some time of trouble comes. Either Mongol comes, or Hitler comes, or Napoleon comes, or Poles come, etc., etc., etc. From this perspective, there is an interesting joke which might help your audience to get it. Like, in the 17th century, Russian elite was learning Poland, and then it conquered Poland. Poland attacked, like, there was a long fight with Poland, and it conquered Poland. In the 19th century, Russian elite was fascinated with France. Then Napoleon came, and they had to defeat Napoleon. In the 20th century, they were fascinated with Germans, and then Hitler came. Well, now they are fascinated with English, and if I were American, I would be nervous.
Yes, it's a good joke.
So, but it kind of reflects this big pattern. So, like, there is this certain element of the cultural split, like, within the deep Russian psychic, like, of the split identity. On the one hand, it understands itself as something unique and particular. Sometimes it's described as the Third Rome, or Holy Russia, or Mother Russia. However, it has also this desire, a little bit, not a little bit, quite a lot, especially among elite, to be like part of the West, or to be like part of the civilization, to be like other civilized people. And for many parts of history, these two desires have been, let's say, in conflict with each other. And interestingly, like, from this perspective, you can say that one of the historical purposes of Ukraine, back to your first question, is to remind Russian people of who they are. It happened in the 17th century, it kind of happened in the 20th century, it is kind of happening now. These Ukrainian nationalists inadvertently and without any of their intention actually help Russian people to remember. Like there is like this saying that, you know, you need to love your enemy because your enemy will never betray you. From this perspective, your enemy is really important to remind you who, like, where your roots are and what is your actual purpose.
Typical Russia. This typical Russian thing, yeah.
Yeah, that's very typical Russian thing.
Yeah.
Then on a third level, very practical and very tragic, which another part of this tragedy, Russia is a very confused state. Russia after 1991 is Russia on a crossroads, and these crossroads are a part of the way bigger Russian crossroads coming back to the split or Raskol of the 17th century. But in the short term, like Russia after 1991 is a very weird state because, like, on the one hand, it's one of many post-Soviet countries, but on the other hand, it carries this historical legacy of, let's say, thousands of years. And you can see how in context of these wars, these two, let's say, spirits are in constant fight with each other. Because if Russia is just one of the post-Soviet countries, its claim over, let's say, territories which in 2022 became part of Russian constitution is weak, at least, let me put it this way. Because if we are just one of the, if 1991 is a holy sacred border, then sorry, like, it's a very weak claim. But if it's a historical entity, then the whole model of the post-Soviet federation with republic, with the ban of ideology, with like this basically very liberal constitution and very liberal norms, and the whole system of governance also doesn't reflect this big historical Russian patterns. And even now, you can see that in the process of this war, you can see how slowly, like this conflict is effectively causing changes within the Russian state, within the Russian society. So that's the third line of argument.
But for a second, sorry,
yeah,
Pavel.
Sure.
Lech Walesa in our studio say that Russian is imperia.
Yeah, imperial.
And Putin is a Tsar. Is it true?
I would disagree with it. I would disagree with it, but from a very particular angle. I would call Vladimir Putin not a Tsar, but a deputy Tsar.
Deputy.
And that's a very tricky. Yes, because a Tsar requires... basically, you cannot just be a Tsar because somebody calls you a Tsar. You need to have church to anoint you to be a Tsar. Yeah. And Vladimir Putin, as far as I know, like, it's not secret, but it's different memoirs, but he's very consciously refused to even follow this route. However, like, if you ask me whether he thinks that he has a responsibility before historical Russia, I would agree with you. That makes him a very weird conundrum. In Russia, like, basically there is this word местоблюститель, which is basically a person guarding an empty throne before a Tsar comes. Mm-hmm. And I would say that's more like who Putin is. So he is guarding the throne, but he is not really sitting on the throne. That's why, for example, in my opinion, he is way more reconciliatory. Like, he is really avoiding harsh decisions as long as it's possible. Like, you need to push him into a corner effectively to make any radical choice, any radical decision. And but to your question of empire, like, again, two lines or two ways of answering it. On the one hand, legally, and it's important, and Russia is not an empire, because empire it's illegal in part of status. But if you substantially, of course Russia is an empire, and it's a good thing, because what does empire mean? Empire means that under an umbrella of one people, like who is as it's called in Russian documents, государствообразующий, so state-building people, like stuff like this. Many different other ethnoses or tribes can live without being obliterated or destroyed. Like, just to be clarified, to me, to say that a certain people is building an empire is a compliment. Like, it's not something, a swear word as presumed within the liberal mantra and within the liberal doctrine. So what is key characteristics of empire? One, it's like it's not worshipping the blood, like the one ethnic blood is not worshipped. So the blood is not the point. And second, empire is always idea-centric. So within any empire, there is a certain core idea, which is the sacred idea. It's a religious idea, one way or the other. And empire has a certain duty, if you want it, to reflect this idea into the world. And you can see that, for example, Chinese empires, they have this whole idea of mandate of heaven, organized, properly ordered world, and that's the idea they manifest. India has its own idea, Brits have their own idea, and so on and so forth. Well, Russia also has its own idea. This is the idea of truths, if you want to put it this way, like the pravda. Like the pravda idea and the justice idea kind of play a huge role in this model. And obviously orthodoxy. Like if Russia is an empire, it's definitely Orthodox empire. Like there is no other way of understanding it.
Yes, let's put here the idea of third Rome. Could I?
Yeah.
Third Rome?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So third Rome is, you can say that it's one of the most consistent ways of naming, one of the most consistent names of this empire, which has been since at least 16th century, like in Russia. And yeah, I definitely agree with it. It is ironic, like basically even during Soviet Union time, when Russia was infected with the Western disease of communism. Just again, I have to remind your audience that communism
Western
was
disease.
not a
This is a very good Western disease of communism. Yeah.
Well, it's not Russian invention. Like Karl Marx was very much not Russian.
Yeah.
Like, let me put it this way, and Engels and stuff like, and Rosa Luxemburg and Kautsky and so on. Like, and again, do we need to remind our audience where Karl Marx is buried? And on whose it is very ironic that basically the whole story of communism was based upon the description of the sufferings of English workers, and yet revolutions happened everywhere but England. It's such a coincidence.
Yes.
Such a coincidence.
A good observation.
So anyway, so Russia was definitely, I'm not like, due to very deep internal diseases, and you can read Dostoevsky on in his Demons how much ill was Russian Empire before this 1917. But anyway, so Russia took this Western disease, but even in the form of Western disease, it's still historiosophically and geopolitically kind of was doing the third Rome thing, one way or the other. Like inadvertently, maybe you can say without its own will, with a horrible human loss and suffering, inconsistently, and that's why like you had the perestroika and the whole collapse, but still it's been happening here. And even modern Russian Federation is still within a third Rome. It's kind of like, I would say like, if any Russia exists, it will one way or the other find a way, or will have to find a way to perform a duty of the third Rome. And here is another, one final line, what Russia is like geopolitically, and for this your audience doesn't have to be like any philosophical or religious connotation. If you notice, Russia has this very much role in global history, then whenever a certain power becomes too close to true global dominance, absolute true global dominance, it stumbles upon Russia. So it stumbles upon Russia. Again, Napoleon did it absolutely unified Europe, was really close to achieve this dream of Masonic French Revolution Empire. Well, stumbled upon Russia, Hitler, NATO. It's the same pattern. It's like in religious tradition, it's called katechon. Basically the idea of a stumbling block, a stumbling stone, stumbling block against the global universalism. So there is a certain interesting element in Russians that they do reject any form of true globalism. Simultaneously kind of seeking the brotherhood of all people. That's a big contradiction within Russian psyche. Dostoevsky called it the dream of unity of all people, but this dream not based upon, let's say, one global superpower dominating everybody else. So this dream should come through either Christ, if you go religious tradition, or through just free, voluntarily, let's say, agreement of everyone. But it cannot come with one empire effectively destroying all other empires and claiming themselves to be one and only. That's kind of the point of that. Takes a huge part within Russian geopolitical identity. That's why, for example, in my opinion, wrongly, but they talk a lot about multipolarity. That's kind of a very bureaucratic expression of the same principle.
But what happens? Why has Russia become so heavily demonized in the West? Who do this job?
Well, it takes a long history. And Rome takes a huge part. you can consider like this tradition of Russian demonization to be a continuation of demonization of Byzantium. Like if you look from one, because remember there was one Rome, and then there was like Byzantium, which continuation of the same Rome, and then in the 9th century, the West invented itself through Charles the Great. That's the thing. People don't understand, like even in Europe, in my opinion, that the only real West is within the borders of Charles, more or less within the borders of Charles the Great Empire. And sorry, Poles, Bulgarians, Serbians, you will never be part of the West. You will never be part of, you were not part of this empire.
Yeah.
Like just to remind, it's Northern Italy, it's Germany, it's France, it's Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, it's parts of Spain, and a little bit other parts of parts of other countries. But basically that's it. And this idea of the first-tier European or first-tier European Union countries, if you consider on their borders, pretty much really fits within the same empire. So you know this big.
This is Charlemagne Empire, yeah? Charlemagne.
Yeah, Charlemagne. Yeah,
Charlemagne.
Yeah, okay. Charles the Great, Charlemagne. Yeah. Yes. And just look at the borders, and you can see that this is the core of European Union, and that's what was even within, like for example, Italy. You can see how the northern Italy is one story, and the southern Italy is different story. Yeah. And southern Italy was Byzantium at that time. So anyway, and obviously, once you claim yourself to be Rome, like you can even say that it's justly. I'm not even arguing that. Like I don't even have to argue here that it was wrong. Let's say they were right. But naturally, you will have like a need to demonize your opponent because there cannot be two Romes simultaneously. So there is like if there is Western Rome, there cannot be an Eastern Rome. Hence, you already have this big line of conflict. Then, secondly, obviously, religious part. Russia's been demonized as an Eastern schismatics for most part of its history because Catholicism and Orthodoxy, they both claim to be the only true Christianity. And when you have such a position, like you will naturally have an adversarial relationship, like it or not. So since West was mostly non-Orthodox, well, here is the big ground to a conflict. And then in the later part, like I would say, in the later part of history, regular stories of wars, but that's kind of more or less fine. And most importantly, I would still say what I mentioned to you before, the fact that Russia several times really stumbled or humbled European dream of basically a Reich dream, like if you want to put it this way, really plays a huge role. In one of the Russian movies, there is this quote, like, for example, about World War II, that they will never forgive us that we liberated them, something like this. Yeah. And it plays a huge role. So I would say so you can look as deep in like 15th century with Herbenstein's pasquils about Russia. You can look into like caricatures of 19th and 18th century of Catherine the Great drawn by Brits, or you can look in modern demonization. But this is continuity, and you can choose any line of argument.
But what the West is seeking in Russia? What for a
destruction?
Destruction.
I mean, absolutely. I would say.
But now you demonize the Western people. Destruction, like this. Why? They're good people. Western people are the best people. Why they look destructive? Yeah.
Well, okay. So let's come close to your borders. Let's come to Yugoslavia. So when I say destruction, I mean more or less what happened in Yugoslavia. So the ideal scenario for the Western project would be if Russia follows the fate of Yugoslavia. So the civil war for like good amount of time, then absolute destroyed national pride, and then destroyed claim for any unique civilizational reference point for the right to determine your civilizational future, and basically becoming a colony of the West. Like, that's what I mean by destruction. Maybe I can rephrase it in different language. In this process, Russian people will achieve a true freedom and a true dream and join a common European family. Yeah. So, you see? Yeah, like, it's depends what you believe in, I guess. But from
do you know how much Bulgarians believe in this? What do you think?
Yeah, quite a lot, I imagine. Like, quite a lot. I mean, you became part of European Union, and that's kind of the contract you have to believe once you become part of European Union. Yeah. But that's what I mean. Like, and when you say evil, again, it might be evil from Russian perspective, but let's say I'm a good on European Union bureaucrat, like the manager of the Fourth Reich. Of course, I think it's for the best. I think that by these measures, Russia will stop its stupid clinging towards the wrong ideals, like wrong, which suppress and that makes the life of these people miserable. I believe that in this process, yes, some pain will be, there will be some pain, but eventually people will get this freedom. They will get this opportunity, to put a rainbow flag everywhere because this is the most important human right ever, existed. They will become civilized, finally, these barbarians, and every barbarian, of course, would be better if he is civilized. And ultimately, I'm doing great good. Okay, they won't have power, they won't have their unique role, but so what? If life of individual people will be better, why would it matter? At least that's the story I can tell myself. And if it's the story I'm living in, how I'm evil. So that's the thing. That's why you noticed I'm avoiding a little bit good and evil, part of the story. It's important from whose position we are talking to. From a Russian perspective, obviously, that's absolutely evil and nightmare. But that's the tragedy of history. The tragedy of history is both parties. Honestly, if you put them on lie detector, would say that they are the good people and they will be honest in it. That's important to you. That's important for us to understand. And one comment also, you mentioned the people. Well, I'm part of the tradition which unfortunately doesn't give people much credit when it comes to decision making. Yeah. So when I say the West, I mean elite. So elite groups who have the power and who make the decision. Obviously, people can think whatever they want to think. But if you look on the whole history, it's always the organized minority united by a certain idea who had power influence. Just to clarify.
But here is the question, do the ordinary Western people understand your explanation of conflict?
No, I don't think so.
And the complication of this conflict?
No, I don't, but it's hard to blame them. Truth be told, it's not the stories they're being told. I read the European press. I read basically the mainstream media, and if that's give people some credit. What I mean, people are tired. If you're an ordinary citizen, if you're an ordinary Russian, if you're an ordinary German, honestly, you don't care much about history. You care about how to fill up your gas tank, how to feed your kids, how to go to your job, which you might hate, and so on and so on and so forth. You don't have time to go deep into history and you at best might know a little bit about your own country's history. So okay, maybe Russians do know better about the conflict since that's what Russia is involved in. But let's say French person, why would he go into this very complicated story of Ukraine, which has been super complicated for all parts of its history? Why? No reason. He's just and he hears something with his ear, in a car or in a tram, or when he started eating his dinner about how evil Russia are bombing children, and of course, who likes big children being bombed? Nobody likes children being bombed. So he is part of the story, and basically, yeah. So obviously they don't understand, and it's kind of unsurprisingly and it's would be weird to expect otherwise. I would put it this way.
But there is my question: why the Western elites didn't just trade with Russia? Russia have everything. We want to trade with Russia. Why to conquer Russia? I don't want to conquer it. I want to trade with Russia. But the elites...
Because it's a good question, and it's a very clear answer, because there are more important things in politics than trade and money and rational benefits. And it's about status, it's about respect, and it's about, how you would put it, yeah, you can call it birthright. So something like this. This is a mistake Russian elites make. They thought in 1991 that they would integrate with the West as equals and as a respectful equals. But that's the one thing West cannot give, absolutely. Because this is the holy right of the West. And by holy right, I do mean it. For Western elites, it's a holy right. And it's not even nationalistic. You can, for example, a person of Indian origin becoming a part of Western elite will share like this understanding of this holy right. And this is precisely the right to determine who is, let's say, let's put it simple, civilized and who is barbarian. So it's about the right to determine the status. And this right is way more valuable than any economic benefit because it's about identity, it's about faith.
About skin?
No, it's not about the skin color, like I would put it this way.
This sounds like racism. This sounds like racism.
Well, it does sound, but that's the thing. When people hear racism, they think about the skin color. And what I'm saying, it's way more, like skin color is just like surface level, and it's not really true. Like,
okay, yeah.
It's more about you can consider it spiritual racism if you want to put it this way.
Yeah.
If you want to put it this way, but this is important. Like this is ultimately important, and that's why you see. In the West, you simply don't have this name for partnership, what Russians mean by partnership. This idea of we are super different, but we are equal. And this comes to the whole philosophy of Herrschaft, as I would say in German. Like in Western, the philosophy of domination is very Hobbesian or Nietzschean or etc. It means that if I'm above, you are low. Master and slave.
Yeah.
Master and slave dialectic, if you want to put it this way. Russia doesn't have it. Russia has different understanding, has this dream of equal partnership. Like, that's what it is. And there is a true deep misunderstanding, because for West, what Russia asks of it simply doesn't exist in its vocabulary. You need to understand, from West vocabulary, you lost the Cold War, you destroyed your own country, so you're becoming our slaves, effectively. Like, yes, we can do the dance around it, like we can pretend that it's not real slavery. Again, look at Yugoslavia. Yeah. Basically the same pattern. But essentially, and you should understand it, you should be the first one who understands that you lost, you are a loser. Loser has no, obviously, rights. Well, and we are the masters. But Russia rejects exactly this. So, and that's why this whole trade part, like, even if you bring 20,000 different papers who will show economically how it's beneficial, it doesn't matter in this story. That's because much more important issues are on the stake.
Let's go back to the conflict.
Okay.
What's the deeper genesis of this? And how, the most important thing is how it will end? Could you predict?
Well, prediction is it's a very difficult game, and I wouldn't call it a prediction. But as far as I see it, this conflict is of an existential status, and it can only end with a defeat and capitulation of one of the parties. This conflict cannot end with, let's say, some temporary peace. Like, it might be short-term temporary, ceasefire, but essentially, if you're talking about the whole conflict, one party must lose. So it's either will end with, as they call it, decolonization of Russia. If Russia loses the conflict, it will end basically with Russia turning into Yugoslavia. And if Russia wins, it will end with effectively dissolution or disappearance of the Ukrainian state. That's how it is.
But Russia is nuclear state. Yugoslavia wasn't a nuclear state.
Well, that's the biggest issue. That's the biggest obstacle. However, if you look from the West perspective, 1991, did nukes help Soviet Union? No. So that's the kind of strategy. So the strategy is to cause so much pain and to cause so much through cognitive warfare, effectively to drive Russian elite and Russian population mad, using many historical weaknesses, which we talked about, selling them this dream of being equal. Yeah, you can say misleading, lying, etc. All it's cognitive warfare. It's the art of diplomacy. So they themselves destroy their country, and that's how it will end. That's a grand strategy of the West. Like, it's been pretty much in the open. You can read Rand papers, you can read NATO documents. I'm not saying anything, crazy conspiratorial. So that's the one story. But with Russia, it's more complicated because you asked about deeper reason, and here you need to understand two different levels. One level is the reasons which were important for Russian elite when they made decisions. And second is general reasons which act regardless of what Russian elite thinks. So the first reason was very straightforward. Russian state honestly, and Putin honestly, was concerned about security. Honestly, it was for him in the beginning about Russian security on the western frontier, which meant no NATO membership, which meant resolvence. Basically, that's if you read the terms of Istanbul Agreement, original, like which was shown to us. Yes, for Russian elite, it was mostly about this. I know it's hard to believe because that seems very weird. It seems too much for a post-world, for a 1991 order, let's say, for the Western order. Still, no matter what it is, it's not you don't have under 1991 rights to cross, let's say, the border of Ukraine and to implement it with vehicles, if you live in this universe. But if you reject this universe, that's too little to ask. So, and that's it, and it's just about NATO expansion. Well, believe it or not, I personally believe that in the beginning, it was mostly about it. It was, and still, the question of Russian security. However, now, after 5 years of war, I think within Russian leadership, you see big change. Now they understand that to solve the problem of Russian security in the West, the terms of Istanbul simply would not be enough. They need effectively complete regime change, and then effectively they need to regain control, direct or indirect, over the whole territory of Ukraine. That's ultimately what I think it is. And that's what but this is a transition within Russian elite over the course of 5 years. Now, if you ask generally, historically, that's very simple. The sole purpose of Ukrainian state, because it's founded on this very narrow understanding of this Ukrainian nationalist sect, is to be anti-Russian. They don't have really any identity of their own. Well, I know it might sound harsh, but if you read all of them, it's very hard for them to say positively who we are. They are mostly, we are not Russians, we hate Russians, that's how bad, that's how we were oppressed.
Is this just in one identity, anti-Russian identity? They have no other identity? Yeah.
No, not really, because then suddenly, if you are not anti-Russian, then you are Russian. That's kind of the problem for them. Because, for example, if you consider the city of Kharkov and the city of Belgorod, they are founded within the same historical time, by the same Russian Tsar, within the same process of fighting against the wild field of Tatars, let's say in the south. Yeah. If you consider, for example, you know that the main, how you call them, airport of Kiev. Yeah, airport of Kiev has the name of Igor Sikorsky. Igor Sikorsky is a famous Russian engineer. Is an engineer who became famous later in America after the revolution, after he immigrated. But he was a Russian monarchist, and his father was a leader of Russian monarchist union. Mm-hmm. And if you look at Ukrainian saints, the saints of this land, they are Russian saints. And basically, all of these heroes, you can't separate them. So if you are not anti-Russian, and that's actually Ukrainian nationalists understand very clearly, if you read their writings. They understand that we must be as radical as possible, because if we are not radical enough, then over the generations, this gravity of common culture, this gravity of common language will bring Ukraine back to Russia, and we will lose our sacred independence. So, but geopolitically, it means if you have your neighbor, pretty big neighbor, and before war with still a lot of Soviet Union legacy, a lot of Soviet Union industry and resources, whose sole purpose is to be your enemy over the long term, you will have this conflict one way or the other. Imagine Mexico deciding that its only identity, or Romania deciding that its only identity is to be anti-Bulgarian. Well, I'm not sure you would happen to have a huge peace for a long time. It's impossible.
Could I say, is the Ukrainian agenda and identity is just propaganda, just in the air?
Well, yes and no. By no, I mean what it means. Because when you say just propaganda, it's a little bit too low. There is this you need to understand that all modern nationalism identities are virtual identities.
In Bulgaria, we don't have modern 21st century nationalism. What's happened? Why just in Ukraine? You understand?
Well, it's not just in Ukraine. Like it happened before. Like it happens on very many different levels. Like I can recommend, for example, your audience this book of Benedict Anderson, Imagined Communities. Like it's a classical book on the study of nationalism, and it shows how basically in the late 20th century it was a huge project of like some power play, some intellectuals to basically create. Because before people's main identity was by their church. That's an important part, and by their sovereign, by their Tsar or Lord whom they are serving. And then in the 20th century, following the principle of Masonic revolutions, they're starting to basically create these new identities through literature, through mass media, etc., etc., etc. So
propaganda.
On this, yes, propaganda. But you see, propaganda, we usually think that propaganda is just a negative term. Like I personally disagree with this reading because in a sense, you take any big community, like it will have an element propaganda. Let's say when you see a cross procession on a street, technically it's witnessing a certain, let's say, belief system, and if you follow the strict functional definition, it would be propaganda. So that's why I personally just try to distinguish between these ideas. But if you consider a modern, I would say if you want to use a more essential definition, I would rather consider modern Ukrainian identity for most part of the people to be a spell, like a spell in a computer game. So it's like magic. So it's like like something enchantment. Yeah, it's enchantment. You can put it this way. So spell it's like you. Yeah. So and yes, this people sincerely now believe in it. It's combined also with huge trauma. Of combined decades of, let's say, intentional work, of cognitive warfare. That's another part of Ukraine you need to understand. There is another line of seeing it, which is important nowadays. It's also a testing ground of all modern and horrible technologies, of drone technologies, of cognitive warfare technologies, basically different experiments of how to effectively drive people mad and cause suicidal behavior on massive scale. Yeah. And this is a technology which, let's say, different cognitive warfare centers in NATO or in the United States. Again, you can read NATO papers on cognitive warfare, and they would basically very openly say that that's the data we receive, that's how we understand it, like that's how we use it. So that's wild field. Is often a place of testing new technologies. And what kind of happened with the Ukrainian population was over the years of its independence. So these people, they got a state, and if state exists, it has infrastructure for this type of activities. They obviously didn't have, it would be like a task of an incomprehensible difficulty to keep the true independence, neutrality, sovereignty, honestly, it would require statesmanship of a level of, I don't know, Bismarck plus Gorchakov plus the best Tsars of all time combined to do it in the context of the 90s. So it didn't happen. And very quickly this, for example, educational institutions became captured by operators with their, let's say, own agenda, and they use the most modern technology of the course of 30 years to effectively cast the spell, which later was amplified and then combined with real traumas. That's important. All traumas of war are real. Let's say pain of people who are being bombed is a real pain. Yeah. And it obviously creates a huge particular reaction. And that's the tragedy of war. That's a whole different topic of conversation, why we live now in the world which has no place for tragedy. Yeah, if you consider, let's say, classical time, read Iliad, it's tragic, and you can feel way deeper understanding of what violence is and what conflict is. And we live in a post-UN UN world which has no room and language for tragedy. That's why it becomes very easily to manipulate people. So you have real tragedy, you have real pain combined with decades of preparation, and you have a population which now effectively is on suicidal path. But that's important part. As we started, from the perspective of operators. It's that it doesn't matter. Even the whole population of this land will disappear. Okay, it's effectively Russian people killing Russian people. So not win, and we got new data, and we got new information on how to carry war against China. That's how it is.
This is the Любе song, Русские рубят русские.
There is one, yeah. Like, yes, the understanding of it, like, it's a certain type of, you can consider it, it wouldn't, in my opinion, understanding of it as a certain type of a civil war is also makes some sense. Yes, it makes some sense.
But why?
And you know, civil wars don't end with truce. Civil war.
You speak for cognitive warfare. Why
Yes.
the Russians have not cognitive warfare?
Well, that's a good question, and that comes to my point of 1991, because the part of Russian elite which came into power, like basically you can call them the heirs of Andropov, and like the certain tradition of I don't know if you might remember it. Like there was this idea of convergence,
I remember
convergence.
Yeah, convergence.
Yes. You can consider them being naive, or they consider being them stupid or overly optimistic, but they legitimately thought for most part of the time that there would be partnership. Like until very recent years, they sincerely believed that they can achieve partnership, because exactly as you said, it will be for common benefit. It will be for common prosperity. Why would we do it? Like, why would we basically drive part of the population insane to just start a suicidal attack? It's just something which Russian elite feels too. If you consider their faults, they might be too rational often. In like at least Putin himself personally, he's a very rational politician. He's a former lawyer, and for him the hardest part is to accept the irrationality of the others, and that's why he legitimately thought that if he presents the best pragmatic, decent argument, like with common benefits, trying to, yes, meet as many interests as possible, but also, yes, maybe more of Russian interests, but also, you know, Russia has 5,000 nuclear weapons. It's still a bigger regional power, so its interests should be respected maybe a little bit more, but within a reasonable framework. Well, that's why he didn't invest. Like, basically, he invested in economy, and Russian economy is doing much better than expected, if you consider it. But this whole idea of spirit, this whole idea of enchantment and disenchantment, this whole idea of cognitive warfare and exorcism, that's not something which his, let's say, Marxist Soviet education combined with KGB school really prepared him for. It's just something he didn't know. I don't think Russian elite, honestly, thought, and still most of them thinks it matters. For example, they thought, well, we defeated Nazism together. Of course, these people would never applaud to Nazi criminals. It's self-evident, because if we don't do it, why they would do it? See? So that's kind of thinking that they were kind of plagued, and that's created a big opening for other party to exploit.
Pavel, let's put Orthodox Christianity in this conversation.
Okay.
What, in your opinion, is happening with to Orthodox Christianity today in Fener, and why does it appear to be under increasing pressure? What's happened in Orthodox planet?
Universe. Well,
universe. Sorry, universe. Okay.
Yeah, universe. Yeah, no, it's okay. Well, okay. If you speak from Orthodox perspective, we always had a messy history. Yeah, like you live in Bulgaria. Like you had time when Byzantium and Bulgaria been fighting each other for hundreds of years. And
whole
like
history, yeah.
Each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Serbs and Bulgarians fought, Bulgarians, like Serbs and Greeks fought, etc. So let's be realistic. Like we haven't been great Orthodox people, all of us. So like we often let our internal struggles to weaken us against, let's say, common enemies. Like so, from this perspective, nothing really new. The same, you need to understand. Remember, from Orthodox theology perspective, the church is holy because of the Holy Spirit, not because of the people in it. The people are sinners, and to an extent we are sinners, there is a huge mess. Yeah. So that's something. And essentially that's keep happening. Like Russian church had difficult, obviously, time under the Soviet Union, but let's say Greek church in Istanbul lived under occupation effectively for 600 years. Of course, it politically speaking created a certain type of incentives and a certain type of habits which, let's say, cause create more infighting and create more struggle. And if you're looking in the lens of Ukraine, that's always been the lens of religious struggle. You have the history of uniats, you have the history of Russian churches, and you have a history of Vatican influence, you have the history of Fanar influence. And yes, so all of these forces, which have been active for hundreds of years, they are still active and they are still fighting each other. And currently, a big tragedy is happening. If you know what I'm saying. So Christians are persecuted in Ukraine. Orthodox people are persecuted in Ukraine, and I just know it because many of my friends are basically effectively living hiding right now in Ukraine. They cannot truly, profess or even get on a street because they most probably will be assaulted or kidnapped. But also from church perspective, if you're looking from silver lining, it's exactly this horrible, hard, tragic time which later we remember as times of saints. So I deeply believe that after all of this, after the dust settles, we will see and know many names of holy people who kept faith regardless of, let's say, the pressures and the betrayals, which betrayal often came from hierarchy, as often in Orthodox history. If you know, almost all heresies or almost all splits came from within hierarchy. Usually, if anything, it's common people who were trying to keep the faith. And even in Ukraine, when Unia happened in 16th century, hierarchs mostly agreed to it, this West Ukrainian hierarchs. But the Russian people of Western Ukraine, they united in brotherhoods, and for several hundred years they were resisting the union pressure, Iov of Pachayev, Vishensky, these names of small priests and basically united with people who were fighting it. So it's tragedy which been happening, it is happening, and it will continue to happen until the second coming. So that's my honest opinion.
Your opinion about Bartholomeus? Sorry, but maybe this is provocation. This is a provocation.
It's a little bit
but I must ask.
Okay. Let's do them. Let's judge. Okay, we're not supposed to judge. Okay, luckily he's not my patriarch, so I can say so. I think obviously he carries a bigger role in the current war, because in my opinion, one of the big spiritual the point when the war of such scale became truly inevitable kind of happened when this whole split in the Ukrainian church due to the interference of Bartholomeus took place. This whole Pitso type of situations, and he carries responsibility for it too. Yes, you can say it. On his general agenda, you know that he is very proud of being kind of called the Green Patriarch, the Global Patriarch. He really likes to be applauded by the people from globalist circles, and to how he can reconcile this with his Orthodox faith. That's the question of his personal heart and judgment. To me, it's a huge contradiction. But in the context of our story, I do think he is a decision to give Thomas in, I think, 2016 or 2018 maybe. Basically at this time was a big, it's putting gasoline on fire, and that paved the way to this war too.
You speak for which Thomas?
Remember, when this Poroshenko, Ukrainian president, flew to Constantinople and grabbed received the Thomas from Bartholomew, which basically established a new Ukrainian church, Ukrainian church, which was specifically not had no ties with Moscow Patriarchate, which is canonically speaking, it is more Ukrainian church was part of Moscow, is still, to what extent it is still part of Moscow Patriarchate. And you need to understand, in Orthodox tradition, you cannot just, change your affiliation willy-nilly. You need an agreement of your patriarch to, even if you want your independence, let's say autonomy, autokephalia, you need first to get the approval of your patriarch. Another patriarch cannot just, interfere and give you but that's a big, there were many, on a smaller scale, there was story like this before, it's a huge, problem in Orthodox world. But in context of this particular story and this particular bishop, his action definitely played a huge role in that this war became inevitable. I don't think some people can look at it as a positive thing. Let's say I'm a Ukrainian nationalist, I would be grateful. Yeah. Finally, we received this foundation that make us truly independent spiritually from these evil Muscovites, and for this we are grateful for this Greek patriarch. So that's the thing. So let's distinguish between fact, so causality, I think causally he carries a huge responsibility, and then your ethical judgment of this causality. And to me, obviously, as Russian and as a member of Russian Church, obviously you can guess what my ethical understanding of this decision is.
Could you explain the role of religion in contemporary geopolitics? Is it religious geopolitics? Is it a religious war here? Do we have in Europe religious war?
Well, spiritual war for sure, as always, because man is, as a philosopher, I believe that man is not basically idea-centric, if you put it this way. So it's about what a man believes in. Even if man believes in atheism, for example, it's still a belief. And so that's why beliefs are what is absolute central in any geopolitical conflict. I think people often consider geopolitics be most about resources or oil or economy. But I personally think geopolitics has way more about ideas. It has way more about what people believe in, what people are treated as heroes, what people are treated as good or as evil. That's why, for example, history war is such important nowadays. For example, I know in Bulgaria you have this whole problem with Macedon, who are heroes and who are enemies.
Who is the Bulgarian Tsar, who is not the Bulgarian? This is the same history. They steal our history. Yeah, they steal the history.
Yeah. That's the thing, both parties. This claim that they steal our history, that's what everybody, maybe that's the one common denominator. Maybe that's one thing everybody agrees on, just, who are they in this quote. But you asked me the question about spiritual, basically historical fight you can consider to be as a lower part of the same fractal, of the same pattern of spiritual fight. Because obviously to ask the question of history, you will end up asking the question of spirit. Who are we? What is good? What is bad? Where we come from? Who is our God? Who is our Lord? And all of this question will end up being into place. They just nowadays kind of happen a little bit covertly. Most people, let's say, think about ideology not of religion, but if you philosophically dissect any system of belief, let's say, for example, if you take liberal ideology, it has its holy saints, holy rituals, holy days, it has its holy, let's say, belief system, it has its own creed, it has its own heresy, it has its own, let's say, allowed and not allowed beliefs. So it's essentially struggles the same, and they all compete for the spirit, so they compete for what people believe in. So it's the central part of geopolitics in yesterday, today, and forever. That's kind of my opinion.
Could you say something for our big dream? What has become of Europe? Some process of self-destruction, of national masochism. I cannot understand what's happened in Europe. Sorry for my opinion, but what's happening in this Europe? We become a dream before 20 years, 25, 30 years. We have a dream. We was like Martin Luther King. I have a dream. Europe must be united. But now, just the gays are united. Everybody is not united in Europe. My humor.
I hope YouTube is not going to ban this. Okay. Well, problem is, like, in my opinion, like, this path of European Union was inevitable after 1991, because we're coming back to Charlemagne. Like, I personally think Europe cannot be united, like, because you have Catholic Europe and you have also, like, basically you have Balkans, which are not Catholic. And then you have some Protestants, which are also have different understanding, like, which also had different understanding. Again, I think what can be united, and we see this historical leaning towards certain unity where it's possible, is like the Charlemagne Empire. These nations can function as one big entity, but Eastern Europe can never become part of this entity. And I know it's like maybe hard to hear for Eastern Europeans who want to think we're the same Europeans as the Western Europeans, but I spent like 5 years traveling across Europe. Sorry, no. Like, ethical system is different. Like, the ethics is different, like, in these countries. Like, you have different understanding of law. You have different understanding of what is right and what is wrong. You have different understanding of, let's say, how we are supposed to live, who are our enemies. Like, you had different historical enemies for a huge part of the history.
Yeah.
However, let's say there would be a cherishable moment. Maybe there were some chances. But if you remember, like, you know that the famous European EU flag with the stars. You know that in the original design of this flag, you were supposed to have a Theotokos in the center of this flag, because it actually takes Theotokos, Mother of God, Mary, Mother of God, Bogorodica.
In the center, Bogorodica must be, yeah?
Yeah. Because if you take the imagery, like this crown of stars, it's a religious symbolism. It's a symbolism of,
like Nimba, like Aureola.
Yeah. But because Europe decided to be secular, quote unquote, and liberal in 1991, has Habermas and constitution effectively. It kind of lost its only common, its true potential common foundation, because the only imaginable common foundation for Europe would be Christianity. But if Europe is not Christian, or it's not treating Christianity as its foundation, only as one of the many different faiths that were present here, but not really its liberal values and it's a human rights thing, like it can be, then you have the structure. Yes, you have the structure of Reich, because any common Europe will be one form of Reich or the other. Basically, that's why I like when people call the European Union the Fourth Reich. I kind of think it's more close to the truth than not. But that's the shell, that's the institution, that's the form. What spirit animates this body, and that's the problem. It's not a common spirit. It's kind of this very particular liberal dream spirit of, yes, some part of European intelligentsia from the 19th century, which were dreaming of creating common pan-European place. And you can still see this in Brussels. But then you have a strong gap between this dream and reality. And then you have a choice, either you keep the dream, of how these people in power understand it, like Macron, Merz, etc., or you go down before this dream took place. And I think that's a tragedy, and that's kind of the tragedy for many Eastern Europeans, because basically, this there is this huge desire, in many politicians. Well, we want to be part of Europe, but we want to be kind of independent within this Europe. Well, yeah. We want to reframe what Europe means. Again, now we will take what our understanding of Europe and we will, let's say, change them. Well, sorry, I don't think it can happen. You either have a true unity on a true value system, common value system, or you don't have this unity. And you cannot just have a little bit of unity, a little bit of unity here, a little bit of unity there, but it doesn't
like a little pregnant, this is,
Yeah, you cannot be a little pregnant. Yeah. And that's kind of the problem, because from the perspective of this pan-European Brussels project, obviously Russia is an enemy. And if it's an enemy, they cannot accept defeat from. Because remember, with a big part of NATO expansion, it's kind of related, because it's kind of this civilizational warfare. what you know, in recent years we got like several books published, like Scott Horton, Provoked, or some other books, basically the biography of Biden recent, like basically when they go through 2022. And it's very interesting that basically in private conversations, they all agree, of course it will be like, if Ukraine ever joined NATO, it will be like so much long time ago, like it's not gonna be soon, or like we're not really, like we're pretty happy with it being affiliated member of NATO, but let's say not complete member of NATO, thus we bear no responsibility for it. But is important. We will never publicly accept this, we will never publicly accept that any other external country or force can tell us that we are not allowed to accept anyone who wants to join us. Do you see what I mean? So it's about right. It's about status. So like it's about our right to claim that we can join Ukraine into NATO if we want so. And so this is a core value of this elite group, like which currently sits in Brussels, and it cannot lose. It would rather put all Europe into the war with Russia, and unfortunately, like there is a non-zero chance that it will happen, then it will accept its defeat. That's the tragic part we live in right now.
What do you think for the next sentence? Western people, they lose the connection with God. After that, they will lose the countries and the myth of Europe.
Oh,
I
guess you can agree.
They're so modern, they're so technical. What do you think for a digital sphere without God? In the digital sphere, you don't have a God there. We just have there demons and...
Yeah. There is a good there is actually a very good Ukrainian proverb on this, which is ironic, like, because it's kind of the story of modern Ukraine. I will say it in Ukrainian and then translate. So it's когда Бога нема, башки бажают. So it means when you have no real God, smaller, basically lesser spirits, lesser demons are playing their part.
Small demons.
Башки бажают. Yeah, small demons. Yeah.
Я думаю, это Достоевский, он сказал, когда нет Бога, все
позволено. Бога нет, все позволено.
Бога нет, все позволено.
Everything is allowed. Yeah. So it's somewhere of those. I agree. Spiritually, it's the same story. Like or more like basically, philosophically speaking, a person cannot have empty heart. Truly, and you cannot have emptiness within your worldview. So you must have some picture of your reality or picture of the world, and this picture must be strong enough for you to answer like the most important question, like who is a man? What does he live for? Who are we? What do we live for? Like what is death? Do people die? And so on and so on and so forth. And one way or the other, your worldview must have some answers to this question. Otherwise, you will literally go insane. That's why, for example, consecutive atheism like Nietzschean does lead to insanity. Most people are not technically insane, but they're just not aware of their desires, of what their passions. They kind of like we, and I'm not separating myself. Like we as modern people are just mostly, how you would put it, dishonest with ourselves. Yeah, we claim to be independent, we claim to be in self-control, or it's only my desires, or like it's what I'm doing. But in the end, like as you said, like we are just becoming slaves to weaker, smaller passions, and that's what you can see. Like you can still see, for example, all mortal sins playing out, like Instagram's big envy and jealousy, like Twitter, anger and hype, and so on and so forth. So it all works.
Like a philosopher, you see how much secular Europe is in one place without the Christian God, without Christian churches, but now we see in Birmingham Sharia. We see a new God is coming. This is Allah. It maybe it's the same God, but the rules are not the same. It's not ours.
Well, I don't think I would be sorry. As an Orthodox person, I have to clarify. No, Allah and God the Father and the Holy Trinity are not the same. Just to put it out of the question.
I agree. Sorry.
If you put No, just to clarify. I have to. Otherwise, I have to confess later.
Yeah.
And I don't want to. And anyway, and like it's interesting. Like basically, it's a big part for European story, and there are two levels again to this: the people level and the elite level. From the elite level perspective, as far as I understand, and maybe I'm wrong, but because of Islam's internal structure, and Islam is very much more straightforward faith, if you want to put it this way. You know how Islam is translated from the Arabic. It's submission. Submission to the will of Allah. So if anything, Islam has very there is a certain correlation. Remember we talked about master-slave dichotomy, like in the beginning of our conversation. Well, Islam actually has kind of this type relationship between man and God, between authority and people. So I can definitely imagine how for certain type of European elite, especially British, why bother with Christianity? Like it's been so long. Christianity talks about consciousness. It's so hard. And it's much harder as a tool to govern people. Like we can keep our Masonic faith, we can keep our principles, like within our elite circles, because actually in Islam you can do it. In Islam it's very also important how you appear outwards. What you do behind your closed doors doesn't really matter. Like that's just how it works. Like that's why within the walled harem or within the walled garden you can be whatever elite you want. So I can definitely see how some of the European elite decided, well, if we replace population, and even if they will be majority Muslim, we'll still be able to control them. It will be even easier than to control these Christian people. Like this I can definitely see. But the second part of the story is this liberal lie, which people need to accept, and it's hard truth to get rid of, to also observe and to be disenchanted, to exercise from it. That neutrality is an option. Because that's kind of what the European lie and the liberal lie was to the masses. That it doesn't matter what you believe in. That you can believe in anything. That basically, we all the same people, just no matter what we consider sacred. Which is ironic because it's exactly this which is denied to the Eastern Orthodox in Russia, but whatever, by Europeans. But this story aside, what I mean is, look at Syria. We think that being nice is enough. The law will protect us. That's the liberal promise, and that is the liberal lie. But it doesn't work. Basically, a man who believes in something, even what he believes is cruel, but he honestly believes in it, he will defeat, say, thousands of people who are not really committed to their beliefs. They will submit to his will. So in Orthodox tradition, it's called lukewarm state. This kind of Europeans are very lukewarm. And most Russians before war were absolutely lukewarm too. I'm, in my life, struggle with this sin of lukewarmness. But we need to understand that historically, when there is too much lukewarmness within you, as people, as person, as family, you become super vulnerable before any external threat, even if it's ugly, even if it's for you looks barbarian, even for example, remember how the government of Assad fell in Syria? This is the government. So it was lukewarm from the inside, it was already corrupted, it was already weak, and then this, very not, you know that later the massacre of Christians happened. So these people, we wouldn't call them good people from our perspective, but it doesn't matter. They believed what they believed in, and that's what gave them strength. Modern Europeans who believe in nothing consciously have no strength to resist this, and that's why they will submit.
Oh, it is very dangerous. This process is very dangerous. What is the biggest liberal lie on the end of our conversation for today? Biggest, please, the biggest liberal lie, because...
Well, I would say the biggest liberal lie would be something like this. It's a Kantian lie. It basically tells that there can be peace without God. And that's what I would say is the biggest false promise which tempts us. Because if you remember the story of nativity, angels come and they say that glory to Lord in the highest and peace on earth among men. Well, these two sentences, from my philosophical understanding, are causally connected. There can only be peace among people and prosperity and love when we give honor and due and love to God. Like so. Otherwise, we are like doomed for war. Otherwise, we are doomed for this internal struggle. And kind of also in such a context, it's better to be sober, you know, like even if you accept that the tragic conditions that people won't be able to all give glory to God before the second coming, like, then at least accept the tragedy, accept that there will be war, then accept there will be pain. Don't buy into this dream that we are better than our ancestors. That's another very big dream lie. Like consider, like the liberal lie of progress. It tells you that we, people of the 21st century, are so much better than our barbaric ancestors. Like that we know better because we have iPhones and we can talk to each other on Zoom. Like, but notice for a moment, even in your Bulgarian history, if you are honest with yourself, who would you rather have as your leader? Ivan Asen or your modern prime minister over the last 100 years? Like, I might mispronounce, like the biggest Bulgarian Tsar, I think he was...
Ivan Asen is better, yeah.
Ivan Asen, yeah. So that's the question. So why, so somehow these backwards barbarian ancestors of ours produced rulers and elite with dignity, with holiness, I would not even be afraid of this word, and the willingness to self-sacrifice way more than we in our progressive world with all of the technology, with all of the knowledge are capable of electing. Well, maybe it tells something about us.
Do you know Bulgarian history? Because Ivan Asen is better example because he's diplomatic Tsar. He's not so big warrior. He's more diplomatic. And the last question, me and you, Pavel, I'm Martin, you're Pavel. You're maybe Russian or I don't know, you're maybe...
I'm Russian.
Ah, okay. Because you're in the United States.
No.
Who is our biggest enemy? We are Orthodox. We are Slavs.
Slava means glory, like in Slavic languages, so that's how I usually like translated Slavs as people of glory.
Yeah,
I know, but that's your choice to which story to believe in.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. And as for your question, I need to find it in English. I don't remember, but basically remember in. Okay, but in St. Paul's it says, наша брань не против плоти и крови, а наша брань против мироправителей, духов злобы, мироправителей века сего, духов злобы поднебесной. So basically it's about this spiritual fight. If you're going into the true deep philosophical level, every person has the same level of fighting. It's about our passions, it's about our weaknesses.
But fighting with who?
First, and I sincerely believe, and let's finish here, that the most important part of our fight is fight within our heart. Because I think that basically we get the rulers that we deserve, in my most deepest conviction. So there is never a story that, people are just perfect and good and wonderful, and then because then the government is just evil. Because government didn't fly from it's not aliens who came to you from the moon. Maybe not directly. Here is the tricky part. Maybe you didn't truly vote for them, but from the desire perspective, there is a certain weakness in my heart. There is in our heart as a people that lets this sort of power to rule over us. And for example, if myself, I desire, let's say, Western quality of living more than being loyal to my history, then don't be surprised when, you get the government which later just sells your national interest just for some European dream. I'm not saying it's even bad, but that's what I mean. So this connection, this with desires is always there. That's why real fight starts with you, with honesty within yourself, with understanding within yourself, with understanding the world around you. So I'm not saying you should, for example, never leave Bulgaria. You can go to Europe, travel, go to the States, travel, understand, seek understanding. Seek to understand who are you, seek to understand who are the others, what they believe in. Don't think that they believe the same things you believe in. like understand the difference. So understanding the difference, you understand better who you are. And once you understand better who you are, then you can be loyal to who you are. And then later on the biggest level, yes, there will be war, but you need to understand. And I have like I have some friends who like been in this war, like even on different sides. And basically, like the Orthodox way of fighting, you know, like coming from our Holy Fathers, is like even when you're fighting with your enemy, you're kind of fighting more or less against the spirit that animates him. Like your goal is not to really like killing kind of comes as a tragic part of the story. Like it's not like killing is not the purpose, it's a tragic byproduct. But it's about, let's say, for example, if a person is animated by this spirit of self-destruction and the destruction of Russian, you will like, and you happen to be Russian, you will end up fighting it one way or the other. But another good quote from Russian philosopher of the 20th century, of Georgy Pomeranets, he said something like this, that the spirit of enemy, so the spirit of devil, starts with the foam on the lips of angel who is drunk with the righteousness of his anger. So we're called to be sober. Even if you are right, don't let we are not allowed to let our righteousness to drunk us. If you know what I mean. We're not allowed to be possessed with it. Basically, you're not allowed to just become, I'm so great, like I'm so good, I'm so holy, they're just so evil. And even if they are evil, you can consider it. Even if your enemy, like your enemy is your enemy, but you're not allowed like to basically become prideful in your process, because then you just fall into the same pitfall. So it's very difficult. Like you brought up Orthodoxy, and Orthodoxy is called by Holy Fathers a royal path, a narrow path, a golden path. But it is the only path of life, and that's what I wish to all of your audience and to you, Martin.
Thank you. Like a man of spirit, the last question, sorry, but I want to. You're a man of spirit. Like a man of spirit, if you meet God, our Orthodox Jesus, what will you say? What you will ask?
Have mercy on me.
This is not a question.
but you know the Job, like the book of Job, like he had many questions before he met God. And once he met God, basically that's the only thing he said. And I'm not sure I'm not more righteous than Job. Like, will be straightforward. So like our Holy Fathers answered even this, like we trust, we believe, we are called to trust, we are called to believe and to ask for forgiveness and to repent, to change the sort of mind. We're not there to judge, and we are not there to, you know, rebel. So yeah, that would be my answer to your question.
This is a good answer. Thank you, Pavel. Thank you very much. Let's speak after 1 or 3 months. We have a lot of questions that we cannot.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Well,
You're very polite.
Thank you very much, Martin.
You're very polite, and the conversation was very interesting for me and for our audience, I'm sure. Thank you.
Вам спасибо большое.